In my observation, there's nothing worse for my enjoyment of a game, or any piece of media, than knowing it's an exceptionally well-regarded, widely beloved experience. That sets an expectation, a strong one. And when a strong expectation is set, a second game emerges from beyond the display, the waiting game. When will this highly acclaimed game become great? Immediately? An hour? 2? 8? It doesn't even matter if it starts good. Every moment it's not great. Every second I'm not being wowed. It's falling short. And if it never gets great, well, that's the worst of all. Now it's time to diagnose what went wrong. A strange thing to do for something that, by my own lights, might even be good. It's obvious to say that it would be better to ignore the clamor and try to address any work independently, if only as a matter of principle, but the situation isn't so clear-cut. Your perception will be influenced by your expectations, no matter how much you've convinced yourself otherwise. And the reality is, few games can live up to such lofty expectations. If there's any Layton game that could be described as an exceptionally well-regarded, widely beloved experience, it would be Unwound Future. Search any listicle, forum post, or compare Metacritic scores, and it's a near guarantee you'll find Unwound Future at the very top of the pile. YouTube seems to have a diabolical box preference. The message is clear. If someone wanted to play only a single Layton game, they should play the third one. This is the great one. But is it really? Yes. Unwound Future is one of those rare games that lives up to the hype. This is an amazing game from top to bottom. It's the game where Luke gets owned by a potted plant. How could it not be? Nearly every scene works in concert with one another, effortlessly moving between one intriguing set piece to the next, doling out small little details that relate disparate conflicts with each other, hinting at the inner worlds of each of the major characters. Unwound Future moves with confidence, electrifying even its first few moments.
I realize it's been some time since you traded in the hard sciences for the softer variety.
Dimitri spits out with incredible vitriol. This is a scenario quite unlike anything in Curious Village or Diabolical Box. Those games initially hung their hats on mysteries surrounding strange objects like golden apples or Elysian boxes. And while Unwound Future offers intrigue with the possibility of time-traveling postmen, it also promises us something far more tantalizing: drama. So early in the game, we know nothing about Dimitri or Hawks, but we do know that they despise each other. I doubt an army of time-traveling postmen would be even an iota as interesting. The appeal to more fraught, interpersonal conflicts signals a refinement of the Layton formula. In my last Spectre video, I spoke a bit about how Unwound Future would have a hugely influential effect on the rest of the series, with all of the prequel games intentionally emulating its tone and style, Last Spectre itself being a pseudo-retelling of Curious Village within these new constraints. While the 3DS games would toy with the formula a bit, they still remain hugely indebted to Unwound Future's new style and cadence. These refinements include a significant increase in animated cutscenes and voice acting, a focus on more extravagant action set pieces, often pushing late-game plot twists slightly earlier into the story to allow for an explosive finale, and interest in the histories and backstories of our leads, alongside settling on a concrete look for relevant staples of the series like Gressenheller University. All of these characteristics are apparent within the first 2 chapters of Unwound Future. The game immediately ensures to implicate one of our cast members in the central mystery, the letter from the future arriving ostensibly by a future version of Luke. Layton is thrown into the mix shortly thereafter when residents of future London begin to make comments about his hat. Later, the game has his formerly dead girlfriend walking the streets. 20 minutes after that, we find ourselves embroiled in a casino gunfight against a mobster organization controlling the city. Naturally, a future version of Layton is their leader, the former gentleman now a ruthless crime lord. This is only a small sampling of the zaniness this game gets up to. While contemporary critics of the series lamented the unwillingness to change core fundamentals of Layton over its 6 main games, Unwound Future definitely feels different from the 2 that came before it. Not all of Unwound Future's tweaks are graceful. The new Layton formula compounded the awkwardly structured second act. Last Spectre played a strange back and forth with Tony after exploring Bard Manor. The game also blew through most of its areas in the first half, leaving you re-exploring Mistallery in the second. Miracle Mask's favorite activity was having you make the trip between the Dromedary and the Lador estate, and vice versa. Azran Legacy's biggest point of contention is its second act, putting the main plot on hold for an egg hunt. Given that the prequels used Unwound Future as a template, it's not surprising to find that it is also filled with inefficiencies. Early on in Chapter 3, we identify the family's headquarters as being the Towering Pagoda inside Chinatown. But the journey to the Towering Pagoda involves an initial trip to Chinatown's entrance, an immediate walk back for a present London escapade, a walk back for a proper investigation of Chinatown itself, and then another walk back for a diversion at the Thames Arms. Only upon returning to Chinatown for the third time do we reach the Towering Pagoda, in Chapter 9. All of these additional events end up being relevant to the story in one way or another, but there was surely a better way to consolidate this sequence into something more intuitive. Leaving the criminal epicenter of future London for a talking rabbit detour was always bound to be an awkward move. On the whole though, when the new formula makes the character beats and side tangents richer and more interesting than before, it's hard to be too upset at the game's somewhat scattershot priorities. London is quite the shake-up from the sleepy hollows and ghostly streets of Saint Mystere and Full Sense respectively. Nevertheless, Unwound Future is quick to distinguish how we should feel about the two variants of the iconic city. The London skyline is simply magnificent, Layton declares on our venture through Midland Road. Overlooking the same skyline in the future, Layton has a far more mixed reaction. This cannot be said to be the most elegant part of town. A factory complex has been built across the future Thames. It's a shame that industry has spoiled the view, Layton comments. Up close, the river looks a lot dirtier than I expected, Luke adds. With its rumbling machines, spinning gears, crowded streets, yellowed skies, and sickly waters, future London is a gross place. A city in perpetual humidity, as if the residents were drenched in an endless supply of dirt and grime. While Curious Village and Diabolical Box saw Layton and Luke ensnared within towns trapped by their own past, Unwound Future initially seems to present the opposite. Layton and Luke appear to be ensnared by an image of the future, where the fair city of London has been usurped by mobsters, a place where not even the sidewalks are safe to traverse. Yet there's something distinctly wobbly and unsettled about this future London. Talking to residents across the time period, they all share remarkably similar stories. They speak about just moving in, about their partners taking on new employment, of recently designed buildings and newly sprouted construction projects. They assume a storied history to places they nor their neighbors were ever a part of. London seems to be in a moment of transition. What might it look like when that transition is complete? Akihiro Hino noted that there was initially some resistance to making yet another new title after Unwound Future. If this is to be believed, Unwound Future was supposed to be the final word on Layton. As such, it makes sense that the game is concerned about the wobbly futures of many of its characters. Though Diabolical Box was very explicit about it being a sequel, it didn't really do much with the returning elements from Curious Village. Don Palo just appeared for appearance's sake. In that way, Unwound Future picks up most of the slack in concluding this very loosely connected trilogy. It does a surprisingly good job at this. There's a sense of finality that runs throughout the game.
Your constancy can be quite a comfort in these uncertain times, my boy,
Layton remarks, in a game that fully intends to split Layton and Luke apart by the end of the adventure. Approaching a fork in the road, the series wonders just how long all good things really last for. Much like the transitory state of future London, there's a concerted effort on Unwound Future's part to signal that, as the series rounds out, our characters are transitioning to a different stage of life. Entering an abandoned shack on Midland Road, we encounter Granny Riddleton one last time. You might not be able to tell from my looks, but I'm no spring chicken. Truth be told, I'm getting tired. I think I've earned my retirement from this puzzle caretaking business. And then she retires. No, really, that's the last appearance of Granny Riddleton until she somehow becomes this in Layton's mystery journey. For the rest of the game, Granny Riddleton passes the buck to Puzzlette, or is it Beasley, to be her puzzle caretaking successor. Chelmy and Barton have a pair of scenes that hit on a similar idea. In Scotland Yard, Luke and Barton bond over their shared connection of being mentored. You know, it seems like the inspector is always yelling at you. Don't you ever get tired of it? It's not so bad. Sure, he scolds me, but only when he has good reason to. Which is often, unfortunately. I make a lot of mistakes, so I get yelled at a lot. He's always telling me I lack insight on cases and don't, pay attention. Oh dear. I never considered the possibility that my goof-ups would harm the inspector's reputation. Don't worry, Barton. What's most important is to try your best. If only I could convince the inspector to see things that way. Later, Chelmy reveals to Layton and company his career plans. I swear, if he didn't have me looking out for him, he'd have been sacked from the force ages ago. Of course, I'm rather fond of the fellow, and I intend to look out for him until I retire, but still. Retirement appears to be on Chelmy's mind as well, and there's at least the implication that he may pass the reins to Barton. If not making him his successor, then at the very least setting Barton up for success. The parallel here is something to consider. If Barton might one day take Chelmy's place, and Barton is analogous to Luke, then that has certain implications for Luke's future. Implications Unwound Future very much brings to the forefront. A statue present in the middle of the plaza invites Layton to compare the figures depicted with his relationship to Luke. The comparison does not bring Luke any comfort. The author used to write big, complicated books, but that all changed because of the boy here. The boy was sick, and to cheer him up, the man wrote an adventure novel for people of all ages. I guess the book was so successful that he went on to write more of them. In the end, the little boy was taken by illness. However, the extraordinary friendship between the author and the boy would remain forever. Luke doesn't want to consider the prospect that his time with Layton will come to an end, so he must reject the statue and its message altogether. Their relationship is perfect just the way it is, no changes. But Luke is clearly desperate for some certainty. Passing by the statue again, Luke asks Clive whether he can tell what the next 10 years of his life will entail. Since future Luke does not really exist, Clive obviously cannot answer his question, so after some obfuscation, Luke remains in the dark, his future still thoroughly uncertain. Of course, a few aspects of the future are more definite than he lets on. A third time around the statue, Luke admits to Layton that his family is moving away from London, which will create a literal and figurative distance between the two. Luke is about to end an era of his life for what appears to be a decidedly less exciting one. What will his life look like after the transformation is complete? We get a possible clue. When Luke flees towards the statue, Chelmy notes, "I thought that boy was joined to you at the hip." Well, I suppose every hatchling has to learn to fly. A scene later, Layton assists Luke and Flora in solving the mystery of the time machine facility's location. Luke connects the dots between the wandering researchers, their wet clothes, and the secret entrance to the facility being underwater. Flora suggests that the passage might be related to the tunnel that passes underneath the Thames. So Dimitri's researchers work across the Thames, then when they need to travel to future London proper, they get their clothes wet in the tunnel underneath. This sequence of events suggests a promising future for Luke and Flora. A future where, as Chelmy suggests, the hatchlings learn to fly, and apply the principles and reasoning they've witnessed alongside Professor Layton to solve mysteries on their own. Luke's transformation may very well take him to new heights, the pupil surpassing the master. Now I just said something quite interesting there a second ago. Luke and Flora helped to solve the mystery of the wet scientists. I think at this point we've seen how the new and improved Layton formula has been used to benefit characters like Luke or Barton, giving them smaller interactions that situate themselves across a game-wide interest. But Unwound Future also builds out a core cast that resembles something akin to an RPG party. It even comes with party banter, especially once Clive and Don Palo join our team. From here on out, the Layton series becomes comfortable with more characters than just Layton and Luke sharing the spotlight. Considering Level 5's pedigree with RPGs, this shift makes sense. So the question is, if the developments within the new Layton formula have been used to benefit the character writing across the board, surely these boons should transfer over to Flora as well, a character notorious for being neglected. Well, to get clear on that, we have to get clear on what there might be to improve upon with a character like Flora. The thing is, the Flora situation is not as dire as it's been made out to be. Curious Village utilized Flora effectively. She may not have had much in the way of screen time, but she was vital to the narrative. The game left the story's most pivotal choice, deactivating Saint Mystere, up to Flora. She was the character who best resembled the themes and arguments of Curious Village, that the fate of the village could be salvaged with an act of selflessness. No, Diabolical Box is where the series missteps. Having Layton leave Flora by herself, someone who's bound to have some issues with isolation having been holed up in a tower all her life, is obviously a bad idea. It has the effect of making Layton look deeply inconsiderate at best. The fact that the game tosses her aside a chapter later only makes the game complicit in his inconsideration. Another example of how Diabolical Box only seemed to be interested in continuity on a token level. Diabolical Box was decidedly bored with Flora. Unwound Future, while not infatuated with Flora, is absolutely cognizant of her poor treatment in the prior game. It's the first beat they hit on with the character.
You two have got some nerve leaving me alone while you go off on another adventure.
Flora reminds Layton of his previous error, then proceeds to have Layton immediately repeat said error in more explicit form. When Luke calls him out for intentionally abandoning Flora again, Layton responds, "Well, I didn't see you doing anything to dissuade the poor girl from coming with us." Layton, you're talking to a 13-year-old right now. Take some responsibility, man. Unwound Future forces Layton's hand. Despite his best efforts, Flora manages to find her way to the clock shop and join the group into the future. The real reason you won't take me is because you think I'll get in the way. I don't know anyone else in this town. What am I supposed to do when you two run off? Both Luke and Chelmy take Flora's side on the issue. Once in the future, the game doesn't let up with its critique of Layton. Actually, what really happened is I followed them here because they ran off without me. They're always doing that, and to be honest, it really hurts my feelings. The gang visits a pet shop in Chinatown, only to learn the owner's husband has skipped lunch with her to eat at a local restaurant instead. Professor, don't you agree that it's very rude to stand someone up when they've made food for you? Oh yes, absolutely. But the most damning critique by far comes in a scene at the hotel. Flora validly argues that if a future Layton and a future Luke exists, there should also be a future Flora. When Flora asks why the two of them had never even considered this possibility before, she adds, "I guess I just thought the two of you would have been more concerned about my well-being in the future." While it is literally true that there is no future Layton nor a future Luke, and thus no future Flora, Unwound Future implies that the figurative reason there is no future Flora is because Layton forgot Flora existed. Thus, she does not exist in the facsimile either. Out of mind, out of sight, as it were. This collection of scenes alone won't do the trick. I've critiqued games before for pointing out issues only for them to return to business as usual. There is no virtue in mere acknowledgement when you hold the power to make a change. But this is where Unwound Future gets it right. The game properly lampshades Flora by directly stating the problem and then working to correct it. Layton repeatedly attempts to get Flora to stay behind at the hotel, just as she had done in Diabolical Box, but importantly, this never actually occurs. From the second she reaches future London, Flora gets to be included on the adventure. She gets to solve her own puzzles with her own puzzle animations. She gets to have banter with the other characters. She gets to help unravel mysteries and go on excursions to secret paramilitary bases. You know, as any child her age should. Flora is undeniably a part of the team. This is why I think it's a mistake to summarize Flora's contribution in Unwound Future entirely by her being kidnapped. Even after rescuing her aboard the mobile fortress, the game re-expresses its intent. Layton asks Luke and Flora to flee to the Layton mobile, but both are insistent on continuing as is. Layton acquiesces a final time. There can be no mistake as to what's happening here. The game is explicitly not shunting Flora to the sidelines. If anything, I think a more substantive critique would be that the game's same point would be better expressed if the kidnapping were reversed. If it were Luke who was kidnapped and Flora needed to join Layton to rescue him. That would make a clearer character arc with regards to Layton's behavior, a definitive statement on Flora being equal to Luke in importance and value. The truth is, I have never liked the characterization of Herschel Layton as a neglectful foster parent. It adds an almost irreconcilable dimension to what is supposed to be a thoughtful, emotionally caring person. Yet even by the cartoon logic this series operates on, that bringing kids inside huge weapons is somehow not reckless endangerment, Layton is still a serial abuser. I'm not sure Unwound Future is fully aware of how unlikable Layton comes across in this aspect, but at least it is now intentional subtext rather than an accidental character flaw, a trait the series will choose to triple and later quadruple down on, until the franchise openly challenges this aspect of the character in the LMJ anime. Otherwise, I have very few negative notes on Flora with respect to Unwound Future. It is not this game's fault the future of the Layton series would go on to inadvertently prove Flora's depressing assessment on the non-existence of her future counterpart correct. It initially appeared that Unwound Future was presenting us with a town trapped in a bleak future, only as the arguably second most iconic Layton plot twist reveals, that future is an illusion. Future London is a set built within a gigantic subterranean cavern meant to imitate a conceivable version of the future. A bad ending for London, to be sure. But the illusion runs quite a bit deeper than that. The motivations behind Future London's construction reveal to us, in reality, another hollow vessel haunted by the past. Dimitri wanted to use this fake London to actually travel 10 years into the past to save Claire from dying in the first time travel experiment. Meanwhile, in the present, Claire's body and soul slowly fades back to the moment of the accident after being transported to the future. Dimitri works obsessively to undo the past, while Claire remains trapped by it in a very literal sense. But the particulars of Future London remain beholden to one person's overriding perception of the world, Clive's. Dupree relays the local news to Luke about some shootout at the Gilded Seven. Having been a part of that shootout, Luke is surprised to hear what's written in the paper bears little resemblance to the events which actually took place. It's full of blatant falsehoods and disinformation. Why would the paper print lies? Luke asks the professor. I hate to say it, but I think the family controls the media here. The papers print what they're told to. Later, Dupree informs Chelmy that Scotland Yard hasn't been a compelling force in the city for years, thanks to the family. Clearly then, the overriding authority in Future London wouldn't want embarrassing failures like the one at the Gilded Seven to reach the masses, threatening their perceived power. We are given something truly dystopic, a future world ruled by corrupt mobsters enacting violence to control political power and undermine the media. But Clive argues there is absolutely nothing futuristic about this hazy city. It is the very current reality of London. Bill Hawkes took shortcuts. With a little bit of money, he was willing to throw away all of his ethics and morality, put his colleagues' lives in danger, killed innocents next door, and was completely vindicated for his brashness. He took the reins of power for himself as the British Prime Minister and used his back alley partners to suppress the particulars of the incident in question. Layton and Chelmy wonder why the explosion at the Polydimensional Research Institute received so little media coverage. When Layton had previously tried to look into the incident, he was assaulted and his home ransacked of all incriminating evidence. Any other route of investigation was stymied. The family controlling the media is no hypothetical, but an exact match to Bill Hawkes and his cronies. In this way, Future London is the perfect mental representation of Clive's perspective. The future city has to be in the present for his argument to make sense. Bill Hawkes is an interesting addition to the Layton villain pantheon. In contrast to Unwound Future's general predilection for having characters expound upon their motivations and feelings, the game keeps Hawkes at a distance. We hear what everyone else thinks of Hawkes and his actions, but never his view on things. As a result, Hawkes is only one of two characters, at least in the series' eyes, to be completely unsympathetic. The other character would be Chief Jakes in Last Spectre. While I thought a corrupt police force was positionally very necessary in a story that wanted to argue that the horror of the Spectre was not as a real physical entity, but as a latent force which uproots families and separates parents from their children, it ruins not just our houses but our homes, as Luke suggests, I did not care for the actual portrayal of the character, which crossed well into the realms of cartoonish parody. Unwound Future fares much better in this regard by keeping us emotionally distant from Hawkes. He never responds to his accusations or faces his victims. It barely seems like he cares about any of what's happening around him. Hawkes behaves closer to a force of nature than a human being, and robbing us of the catharsis in seeing his downfall, in complete opposition to Jake's, makes Clive's opinion on the man much more palatable, the actual antagonist Unwound Future wants us to feel sympathy towards. It would be wrong to think Clive's ire is limited to only Bill Hawks, though. As he so declares in the Thames Arms, his crusade is against both single-minded scientists and corrupt politicians. His anger is aimed at anyone who would treat people as extraneous.
Who are you to argue with me? As a reporter, I've witnessed countless tragedies firsthand. And it's clear that my life isn't the only one that's been destroyed in the name of progress. To those in power, the rest of us little people are all just bumps on the road to a brighter tomorrow.
Dimitri Allen clearly fits the bill. Here is a man who openly states that the ends can justify the means. Here is a man completely fine with kidnapping scientists and hurting others for his benefit. Subject 3 recounts his backstory of being scooped up and tortured in a strange laboratory, presumably one of the first test animals for the functioning time machine. Subject 3 is the tiniest little bump on Dimitri's very long highway. The injustice of that moment 10 years ago consumes Clive's mind. Nothing has been acknowledged. Nothing has been fixed. These criminals are still walking around as if nothing has happened, shielded from any negative consequences. How should one describe such a confounding problem? In one scene, Luke wonders why a time-traveling device couldn't be used for good. Clive describes the problem in simplistic terms. Imagine there's this bully who's always giving you trouble. Now let's say you had that time machine we've been talking about. Would you travel back in time to when that bully was a bratty 5-year-old and wail on him? Of course not, that'd be cruel. Of course you wouldn't, because you've got a good heart. But imagine the damage someone less kind could do with a machine like that. In Clive's view, people like Dimitri are no better than bullies on the playground. Mean, nasty people with bad hearts. Something is clearly wrong though, isn't it? If time traveling isn't allowed, how should one stop a bully from harassing you? Isn't Clive exactly the time-traveling 5-year-old beater he describes in his scenario? The answer lies in a competing interest.
The only thing a bully understands is force,
Clive explains. To beat a bully, you have to become a bully yourself. This framing places Clive in a maddening contradiction. On the one hand, it is wrong to harm others as a means to your ends. That is the way of the bully. On the other hand, it is only possible to stop bullies with their own tactics. And if no one stops the bullies, they will continue to treat other innocents in impermissible ways. So proper justice demands Clive to take definitive action, to come up with a situation so destructive, so obvious, no amount of coercion or money or mobsters could possibly hope to conceal it this time. Hawks's evil must be revealed to the world by using a force greater than that of England's highest seat of power. This tension is what Unwound Future argues is in the nature of terrorism. The folly inherent in Clive's violence is that it becomes misdirected, aimless. In the end, it manages to hurt everyone except Bill Hawks. Clive's violence may be understandable, but it simply does not work. It does not produce the demanded result, nor the accountability Clive desires. It only makes for more bumps on the road. Yet Unwound Future maintains a rather muted, almost sympathetic tone towards Clive. It too understands the other side of the tension. The mobile weapon is symbolic of the righteous, inevitable fury unleashed by injustice. Bill Hawks, his beating heart hooked up to the central generator powering the weapon, acts as the key to keeping the machine alight. People like Hawks are the corruption which fuels the burning engine of political violence. Unwound Future brought a more reflexive edge to the series, one final characteristic of this new Layton formula. The games in some small way became more about themselves. Last Spectre wondered whether an attempt to pen the next chapter of the Layton saga would end up defacing the spirit of the originals, a common complaint against prequels. The game even begins with a retcon, that Luke was brought up in Miss Tallery, even though he clearly states that he was born and raised in London in Unwound Future. Miracle Mask used Monte d'Or as a representation for the rapid growth the series experienced in only 5 short years. Meanwhile, Azran Legacy used its fallen civilization to contemplate the longevity of the series as its buzz and popularity dwindled after transitioning to the 3DS. This same self-reflexive tendency certainly expresses itself in Unwound Future. We saw a bit of that before with the game entering the core characters into new stages of life as the trilogy concluded. But for me, it really comes back to that statue. In memory of an extraordinary and everlasting friendship, Layton reads aloud at the plaque nearby. The statue represents a relationship that is able to transcend time and space. The boy's illness would put a stop to his and the author's adventures, yet their bond remains immortalized by the author's stories. Changing from writing big, complicated books to adventure novels for all ages is the indelible mark left behind, proof that their time together had a lasting impact. Layton and Claire may have been ripped apart by tragedy, but the importance of that relationship continues on, acknowledged through the hat Layton wears in her memory. It's all a bit silly, isn't it? The probability of there existing a statue depicting distinct people who just so happen to look exactly like Layton and Luke is astronomically small, and it's even less likely that the pair would just so happen to stumble across it in their home city. But none of that even matters because there is no future London to begin with. All the buildings, streets, sidewalks, casinos, and bars were built only a handful of years ago, that statue included. So in truth, what the statue depicts is a pair of fake people who went on fake adventures and wrote fake books that no one could ever read even if they wanted to. Did fake London really need to have a ridiculous statue like this to be considered realistic? The question is meaningless, of course. That is not how this series operates. Instead, it asks us to look past the pragmatics, the nonsensical particulars of how, and see the statue only for what it represents. The bond between Layton and Luke. That even though the two's journey together will be coming to an end, their relationship is immortalized by the games before us. Herschel and Luke don't need to be glued together to remain forever. I can think of no better symbol for Professor Layton.